What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is the Planet Soccer Pod. I'm Reed. That's Dylan. Today, we're continuing talking about Champions League groups. This first episode, we are doing groups E and F. Two pretty different groups, but both with similar amounts to talk about. So I think this will be a pretty fun episode and lots of insights into these two groups. Group E is what we're going to start off with. They've got Feyenoord, Atletico Madrid, Lazio, and Celtic. Feyenoord is the pot one team as the Eredivisie champs from last year. Atletico Madrid is the pot two team, and then Lazio and Celtic round out with pots 3 and 4. Dylan, I think I used the word snooze fest for this group. I kind of lean back, or not lean back. I kind of take a step back on that the more I think about it. I do think that
Me too,
it
for
could
sure.
potentially be a snooze fest with maybe some of the styles, especially Atletico Madrid. But they're a physical team, and they usually put on a show in European competition. So looking at Group E, what do you think about this group? What stands out, and what do you have to say?
that that was honestly the first thing I've written down is backtrack on initial reaction, word for word what I have, because I tried to come up with a different word than you, but I think I ended up using snooze fest as well if I
Yeah.
remember right. But this, on paper, I think Atletico should win this group fairly, fairly easily. However, I do think it's a very evenly spaced group as far as talent level and performance level. I will admit this last weekend probably played a larger role than it should have in my prep for this episode, because we saw some pretty convincing performances from the group as a whole. Celtic dominated Rangers in the first. Rangers didn't have a shot on target first half. I think they finished with 3 or 4, but Celtic looked very good over the weekend. Lazio, we talked about, maybe not the most convincing win, but I don't think it matters when you beat Napoli in, was it September yet? Yeah, it would have been September.
Mm-hmm.
In September, when they didn't lose until January in the league last year, that's definitely notable. Feyenoord has looked very good in league, albeit against Eredivisie competition. And then Atleti is Atleti. I think they're kind of the one we both expect to win this group. But I do think it got a lot more interesting for me this weekend, seeing some of the performances from those two, or I'm sorry, pot 1, 3, and 4 teams, at least for me. Tactically, what kind of sticks out to you? I know Simeone is super infamous for very, very boring tactics, but successful tactics. Is that kind of where most of that snooze fest came from? Or do you truly feel that Atleti should walk this group? Or where do you kind of stand specifically on Atleti and how they fit into this group?
My snooze fest was more just looking at the brands in this group. I think there's not. I mean, I understand like Celtic and Feyenoord and Madrid or Atleti are big clubs and especially really popular in their countries. However, as far as just name brand jumping off the page, they didn't stand out to me. I think with Atletico Madrid, yeah, they probably are the favorites. Yeah, I probably like them to get out of this group, but they're not going to walk over any of these opponents. They're not going to score a lot. At least I don't think.
They put up 7 in their last league game. They won their last league game 7-0. So like it wasn't this weekend for whatever reason. Honestly, I don't know why. I think it was weather related. Their game against Sevilla was
It was
postponed,
like last
which
Monday.
was a little disappointing.
Rayo
Their last
Vallecano.
actual game was which is not a top side in La Liga by any means, but it's certainly not a scoreline I expect to see out of Atleti. It's very weighted, but in 3 games they have 10 goals, 7 of those coming in a single game. But that's not typical of the Atleti sides we're used to. So when kind of diving in a little bit deeper into this, I did kind of change my mindset on this being boring. It doesn't necessarily have that like grade A star power of a PSG or a Bayern or one of the English clubs, but I think the home atmospheres for all 3 of these will be electric enough to keep the group very entertaining, even if Atleti does win the group comfortably. So I'm actually heavily looking forward to this. I probably have a slight bias towards Feyenoord at this point, not only because they're Eredivisie and we both kind of enjoy Eredivisie in European competitions, but they also have a Newcastle loanee who scored one of the most disrespectful goals I've ever seen in my whole entire lifetime over the weekend for Feyenoord, to give them a 5-1 win. So it's a guy that Newcastle signed for like 6 mil, and immediately got loaned to a Champions League sign, which is a very good sign for Newcastle's recruitment. So I'm definitely a little Newcastle bias in this group. I hate to tie things to Newcastle too much, but I do want to preface my predictions that'll be coming here in a little bit and say I'm a little biased after seeing that goal and Newcastle having a loanee. But I think the weekend results, as I said,
Mm.
Lazio's win over Napoli is certainly something to not turn your nose up at. Initially, I think I said this in our initial reaction. Atleti's the third best team in La Liga. Lazio probably fifth or sixth best in Serie A. Feyenoord's a top 2 or 3 team in the Dutch league. However, it is the Dutch league, so a little bit less respect across European competition in comparison to the talent discrepancy, at least. And then Celtic being, Scottish Premier League team, lost their superstar, if you will, goal scorer over the summer. So I do have some question marks surrounding
And
Celtic,
their
but if
coach.
nothing else, Celtic is not, yeah, and their coaches, you know full well. So Celtic is certainly not something to turn your nose up at because they do have such great history in Scotland and will be a very, very tough place to play. But I think for me, the coolest thing about this group is similar to our next group, Group F, is the away days for all the fans and just the atmospheres on each match day will be tough to top this group.
Mm.
It's going to be a very competitive group. I do think Atleti should win the group, but I do think overall it'll be quite competitive. I don't see this being a group where Atleti even wins 5 games. I see them probably winning 3 or 4, comfortably finishing in first, but being challenged at times, and then that 2 through 4 is almost a coin flip for me with Celtic probably being on the outside looking in, probably finishing in fourth. But I do think it's a lot more competitive than my initial reactions to the group probably were.
Yeah, I think with Feyenoord and Celtic in particular, they play contrasting styles to Atleti, so that'll be interesting. I know a lot about Feyenoord because Arne Slot was heavily linked to Tottenham this past summer before we hired Postecoglou. So I know they're going to come out and try to possess the ball and score, which might play into Atleti's hands, might not. Who knows? The quality, I don't think Feyenoord has the same as they did last year, winning the league. They lost their top scorer to Benfica, I believe. Kochu, or however you say that last name. I think it's Orkin Kochu. And Celtic, they might honestly favor better this year than they did in last year's Champions League competition because of Brendan Rodgers, I think. Ange Postecoglou's style, it works for a team on the European stage if you have the talent to play it against other really talented European squads. They didn't have that last year. So I think Brendan Rodgers will be a little bit more practical, potentially having a little bit more success. I don't know, or I don't have Celtic getting out of this group, but they might put up a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more respectable of a performance this year. Lazio, I really don't know a whole lot about. They're sitting 12th in the league right now, albeit just beating Napoli. They've lost probably their best player of the last 10 years over the summer, who went to Saudi Arabia and Milinkovic Savic. So he was a guy that definitely is not past his prime and still is a really good player. So huge loss for them. That honestly kind of takes away any hope that I gave Lazio of getting out of this group. I know he left a while ago, so they were never going to have him. But getting to my predictions, I do see probably Atleti finishing top, Feyenoord second. I'm going to put Celtic third and Lazio fourth.
Yep, that honestly that mirrors exactly my predictions. Originally, when the groups first came out, I was bold enough to put Celtic in second. That's probably a little bit too bold. I've kind of soured on that a little bit. I do think that 2, 3, 4 is going to be very, very
Mm.
tight, likely coming down to match week 5 and 6. if not all the way down to match week 6 for that final position. So I do expect that Atleti to comfortably advance. I would almost guarantee that they advance. I think they will likely win the group. I do think Feyenoord. I have there again. I don't know if it's kind of a little bit of biases after after seeing the goal over the weekend. It's not a match I watched, but it's a clip I've seen countless times, and a little biased because of the Newcastle ties there. So I'm hopeful, and I'm predicting, I guess, Feyenoord uh, taking second, Celtic third, and then Lazio fourth. But by no means disrespect to Lazio, especially over the weekend with their win against Napoli. They're not going to be kind of a rollover team like I think I may have originally predicted. That does certainly kind of make this group feel a little tighter, even with them sitting in 12th. That's a massive win, big boost of confidence going into an international break, and then shortly after that break, they're going to be coming out and playing Champions League football. So I do think it's going to be a pretty tight group here in Group E.
Yeah. Moving on to Group F, the group of death this year, the group of fun, the group of big names, big brands, big stadiums. It is Paris Saint-Germain. Group F, Paris Saint-Germain, Borussia Dortmund, AC Milan, and Newcastle United. Storylines galore in this one. You've got the battle of Saudi ownerships. You've got Yellow Wall. You've got Tonali going back to Milan. Just a whole lot going on in this group. I think that it's pretty wide open. There's a clear talent-wise number one team, I think. But the team playing the best, I think, is AC Milan right now. Newcastle probably has the most to give that they haven't shown thus far this season. Haven't looked good, albeit with a tough schedule. So, and then Dortmund is Bellingham less. So we will see how they respond and how they come away and get their points in this one. If they do, which I'd imagine they'd at least get a point in this group. Dylan, Group F, to your group. I've seen a lot that it's like a great group for neutral fans, superb draw, and then a nightmare if you're in the group, which it is on the field wise. But I know there's lots of anticipation for it and fun that's in store for the teams that are in this group. So, as a fan of one of these teams, what do you see, and how do you see it playing out?
Maybe a little, well, probably heavily biased. This is the group of death to end all groups of death, in my opinion. You look at the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen a really tough group with PSG also involved, with Liverpool and Napoli a couple years ago. I think it was 18. Same year, Spurs had Barcelona and Inter, but in both of those groups, the fourth team was far inferior to the top three. I think maybe the top three of each of those was probably a little bit better, especially seeing Dortmund and Newcastle their starts to this season. But I think as far as depth wise goes, it's absolutely bonkers that this is an actual Champions League group. But this is exactly why we love Champions League. You have a newcomer in Newcastle, three very well established European powers also in the group. Like you said, massive away day for fans. You have the Saudi versus Qatar, PSG versus Newcastle match. You have Tonali going back. You have so much talk and anticipation around the fans and the stadium. As a Newcastle fan myself, you asked me going into the draw what I wanted, and I don't remember exactly what I gave you. I think I said like Barcelona because there's history there with us. Inter selfishly, and I don't remember who I had as the pot three team, but I remember you were very surprised at my desire to have a very difficult group. Obviously, there's a lot of money that comes with advancing out of the group stage. So I do understand Newcastle fans' desire to draw a Feyenoord or somebody lesser in pot one than PSG or lesser in pot two and three as well. But I'm super excited. It'll be a big challenge. I think it'll be very important in our growth as a club, going in right away and playing probably the toughest group stage in Champions League history. Um, I will say I think there's been a lot of talk around PSG, and obviously you lose Messi, you lose Neymar, two of the top 10 footballers in the world. I almost think this is like the best summer window that they could have possibly asked for. I think they are a much more unified team now than they were before. They tried the whole Galacticos or their rendition of Galacticos for a while, and it didn't result in um, more than domestic trophies. So I think they may be better conditioned for a long run in Europe. One thing that I think PSG kind of lost over the last 5 years was a strong Parisian or French overall tie. And they've kind of reinvigorated that let's be the best team of French players that we possibly can this window. And I think that's going to be super interesting, kind of to see how that works for them because we have seen them as talent wise one of the best three teams in all of Europe. They probably still are. Maybe they're like 4 or 5 now, certainly top five, but maybe a bit of a drop off in actual footballing talent. But I think we might see a more unified PSG, a little bit more pride involved in their play. Fantastic managerial hire over the season. Very busy transfer window. So I do expect a lot out of PSG. As hard as this group is, I feel comfortable stating that PSG should and will win this group. I don't want to say comfortably, but I don't really anticipate a world where they don't win, despite how well AC Milan has been playing. I do really think PSG is conditioned for a really deep run here in the Champions League, and I do think that'll start off with a group victory in Group F. Um, from a Newcastle perspective, this season could not have started any worse. To be honest, that's tough to say. You open up 5-1 against Aston Villa, who is a European favorite this year, probably. Um, and it's been all very, very, very downhill from there. Tactically, I think teams are kind of starting to figure out our press. When we do press with the current midfield we have, there's a lot of space open in the middle of the field. I don't know if that is to PSG's extreme benefit. It'll heavily depend on how they deploy Mbappe. If they will be able to exploit that, if Eddie Howe does have any changes, but I think it does set up quite nicely for Milan. Pulisic kind of running through the middle of the field, looking to receive passes when we are pressing. I think AC scares me a lot. It is unfortunate we open at AC a little bit. It's going to be a very, very tough first match. But overall, I'm happy we're there. Also, very happy to see multiple Americans playing at St. James's Park in the Champions League as a Newcastle and USMNT supporter, getting the likes of Pulisic and Raya coming in and both, depending on Raya's health, likely starting against Newcastle in the Champions League will be pretty entertaining and pretty fun for me. A little bit difficult because I just have a strong feeling Pulisic's going to bag at least one against us. So the insides of me and my USMNT fandom will be very excited to see Pulisic scoring on the biggest stage of all once again. But it is going to be pretty tough seeing him do it against my side. But I think this is a. I mean, we could go on for probably 20 more minutes about this group tactically and storyline wise, but I do think this is going to be an extremely entertaining group. It's getting all of the hype that it deserves, and I don't think it's overhyped. Like you said, Newcastle, we have not seen their best football yet this year, outside of maybe that 5-1 thrashing in match week one. So I do anticipate, especially after a break in this season, where Eddie Howe is going to be able to really hunker down tactically and in training with all of the non-international players. I think will be extremely valuable, and we'll see a different Newcastle side coming out of the break. But you know, I could very well see Newcastle getting 3 points max in this group at this point based off of the start to our year. St. James's is obviously a huge factor, but I think securing more than three, like guaranteeing we secure more than three, 2 weeks ago felt foolish. Like obviously we'll get more than 3 points. We play 3 matches at home, but based off the start of the season, I am pretty worried about our futures in the Champions League.
Yeah, I think I said at the beginning it's the battle of Saudi owners. I meant Middle Eastern owners. If I misspoke there, with Qatar and Saudi Arabia. I think this group. It's weird that I'm riding Dortmund off so much. I do have Dortmund finishing
I know.
fourth. It feels weird, but I mean, obviously, I know players on Dortmund's roster, but and they'll be playing at home. But just something about them this year, it looking at their fixture list and how they've played, and the rumors of a row after the Cologne game versus Schlotterbeck and Terzic, they just don't feel right now. With Newcastle and Milan, I don't know. I just see Milan, and they made a run to the semifinal last year, which I think I forget about a lot of the time, even so they beat Tottenham to get there, so I should remember, but I just forget about them making that run, and I think we're going to see a Rafael Leao this year that could potentially shine just as bright as Kylian Mbappe in the group. I think he's been fantastic for the past few seasons, and he's got a new contract at Milan. He's committed to them, at least for the time being. So, and then they had a really good summer as well, even after all of the drama at the beginning with was it Pirlo leaving? Was he the director? I think so, yeah. And then selling Tonali was a big blow to the fan base, and people kind of saw him as the future of the AC Milan midfield. And then PSG, like you said, probably less talented than they have been the past couple of years, but I do like a lot of the moves that they made. Most of the moves that they made, they probably will be a more cohesive team, and Kylian Mbappe does finally have that grasp on the team that he has craved, it seems like, for a while now. So there's no Messi, there's no Neymar. They brought in Ugarte, who I think is a fantastic signing, and Zaire Emery and several others that have come in and potentially made that team a better team, like we've seen with Tottenham in the Premier League. Losing Harry Kane, they've looked like a better team. So with this group, I do have PSG finishing first, AC Milan second, Newcastle third, and Dortmund fourth. I do need to see more from Newcastle consistently and in the midfield. I don't know. It just still feels like an incomplete team, even though y'all are so deep this year compared to what you have been. I do like what y'all have first and second. Most areas on the pitch in that first and second spot in the depth chart. But I see real holes in the midfield, which is weird because y'all have really good players there, but just style wise, it opens up a lot.
It's not cohesive right now.
And
Absolutely.
I think Milan can exploit y'all in some areas that we've seen so far in the Premier League. That I don't know if they'll get figured out until you get a new player to maybe come in and play a different role in the midfield. So that's kind of what I think about this group. But very fun. It's going to be exciting. It is the group of death. I didn't go back and look at previous Champions League groups from 5-10 years back, but it would be hard to find a pot four team like Newcastle. Just with it hasn't been a ridiculous amount of money y'all spent, but a lot of money spent. The only reason you're a pot four is because you haven't featured in Europe, or you've been relegated within the past 6-7 years. So obviously the coefficient ranking isn't up there, but it's just a really unfortunate pot four team for other clubs to have. And I don't know, y'all could get through it, start playing your best, and get through this group. But I see Milan's experience and PSG's cohesiveness beating y'all out.
Yeah, nope. I hate to be boring here. I have the exact same order: PSG, AC Milan, Newcastle, and then Dortmund. However, I would be more surprised with Newcastle advancing than Newcastle finishing fourth, without a shadow of a doubt. The center back lack of depth, I think, is extremely concerning. Newcastle plays 7 games in 22 days, which is almost a game every 3 days, and we're not going to be able to rotate center backs. Not only can we not rotate, if somebody does get hurt, we just saw Botman obviously did not play this last weekend at Brighton, and it showed. Having Matt Targett start on the left and Dan Burn having to revert back to a center back role that he played most of his career, but I think does fit Newcastle a little bit better on that left back role. So that's my biggest concern is that fixture congestion, if you will. I do think there's enough depth moving forward, and in the midfield, but that backline depth does worry me quite a bit. I'm a big fan of Lewis Hall and Tino. I don't think they're likely to. Maybe Lewis Hall, who shout out to him, just got an England call up today, which seemed very surprising. But I think Lewis Hall has a chance to feature. I don't think Tino will obviously see much of the field, with Trippier being at right back. But not answering that center back depth is extremely concerning. You're looking at a situation where potentially all it takes is 2 injuries, and you have Dan Burn and Jamal Lascelles as your center backs going up against PSG, Milan, and Dortmund, which is extremely terrifying. So I honestly do think we're more likely to finish fourth than finish second, which I probably, if you told me this exact group before the season started, or when the window still had a couple of weeks, I might have felt differently. But just seeing how big of an impact losing one of our center backs had played over the weekend does put a lot of worry in my soul and in my gut. But at the end of the day, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy we have made such a turnaround. I think it'll be very important as a club and as a fan base to not get overly down if Champions League doesn't go overly well. When you consider 24 months ago we were looking at relegation, it is a massive, massive progress, and I do hope the club and the fan base are able to take as many positives away as possible. And playing Champions League football this quickly is not something we expected or even had dreamed of in our wildest dreams after being taken over, especially with the restrictions on transfers that would kind of be in place due to financial fair play. So I would love to be more positive on Newcastle, but I do think it's going to be a really tough draw, especially as well as AC Milan has been playing so far this season.
That's what we think about groups E and F, guys. We appreciate y'all watching as always. Make sure to subscribe. Give us your thoughts down below in the comments, like and share it with any of your friends or family that you think might be interested. We will be back at y'all with groups F, G, and H.
G and H. There you go. Got the alphabet right.
We've got A, B, C, and D up. Go check those out. And then after this one, we will get the last 2 groups. I think it's the last 2 groups, right? Yeah, last 2 groups out to y'all.
Yep.
We'll talk to y'all next time. Appreciate y'all watching. Peace out.